Welcome to the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka blenderhd, Blender HD, and it's Monday. It's Monday with McCool. I don't know. Is that a good theme song? I don't know. It's James McCool. We always have him on Mondays, the co-author with me of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio masterclass. How to think like a professional DFS player. Most of the stuff that I talk about on this show every day are based on concepts in this course. So go to theoryofdfs.com, pick it up with James. This MLB season, I don't know if there are just a lot of new people playing MLB, but like I constantly, even over the weekend, I can do this show every day. I do it every day. I talk about stacking in MLB every day. Yet still people have questions about, well, is this the type of slate to stack on? Is this type of, do I play 3-mans or 4-mans or 5-mans? Do I do 5-3? Do I do 5-1-1? Most of the time my answer is you're overthinking it. Like the difference between, 5-2-1 and a 5-1-1-1, what does it matter in the grand scheme of things? Here at RotoGrinders, we have a tool/article called Slate IQ, which is a simulation of a GPP contest. So we typically take the large field GPP, use our ownership, use our Slate IQ projections, and based around 25 closest slates to the slate that we're, with the team totals and the amount of teams and the pricing and everything. And then based on that, run a simulation 1,000 times and then see what the results are. If we ran the slate 1,000 times based on those parameters, how often does this type of stack win? How often does that type of stack win? This team win versus a cheap pitcher win? And then versus how often the field, the ownership of that type of lineup is rostered. And the ultimate goal is anything that wins more often than what the field is going to roster them at is plus EV. I mean, over time. Do you do any type of simulation like that on your end?
No, I don't, because I don't have the computing power for it.
Okay.
It takes a lot of computing power in order to simulate like full out slates. And I could like buy some Amazon web storage and do that, but frankly, I don't have the computing power for it. So I do look towards stuff like that. Like I have a RotoGrinders subscription. I look at Slate IQ, and I pay attention to stuff like that. But no, I don't do it on my own end.
Okay, but I mean the methodology is useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very time intensive, but you also have to admit that it's only as good as the data that you give it, because basically you're making a derivative. You're doing a simulation that's a derivative of multiple data points that if they were off by 5%, just end up exponentially making any simulation worse and worse. Because like if it's based on if we have a stack that's going to be we predict to be 14% owned and a 15% owned, and it ends up being 10% owned. I mean, that's a 33% difference in the ownership, and obviously that ownership goes elsewhere. And let's say the projections are not the most accurate, and there's no projection set that's going to be perfectly accurate, obviously. But let's say it's off by, compared to other ones, by 0.2, which could be, in the grand scheme of things, 1 or 2%. But that, obviously, that 1 or 2%, now extrapolated over 600 players on the slate. And if the ownership is off by 5% here and 10% there, then all of a sudden your simulation, how much does it mean necessarily? So the margin of error on any type of simulation where you're simulating a slate, like it could be very wide. It's really, really imperative that the originating data, this is why Slate IQ is not just run once a day. Typically, Jamino has it run earlier in the day, like Maybe it'll come out maybe 3:30 when we get a bunch of the lineups in, and then it's run maybe at 5 o'clock, and then like at 6:15, like as close to lock as possible, because obviously ownership gets better time and time. Oh, this guy's out of the lineup, and this guy's batting third down. He's 2,200, and he's going to be owned 17%. Well, that affects all the other ownership on the slate. But one thing on Slate IQ that really doesn't change, like if you use Slate IQ, which is a premium part of RotoGrinders, you could sign up, click the link in the description, get $10 off your first month. The only thing that I use Slate IQ for, I'll make a precursor on why, is the team stacking. So if we see on the screen here for yesterday's slate, based on Slate IQ, it will show you how often the team stack of 4 to 5 man of a team ends up being in the winning large field GPP lineup. So yesterday we had Boston at 10.7%, the Yankees at 5.6%, the White Sox at 5.1%. It'll also show you what the field is going to be rostering that at. So Boston 10.7%, the field 9.9%. That's plus EV. Plus, it's going to win more often than what the field is rostering at by a certain percentage, and that's why we have this little leverage score here. Now, a lot of times, we'll see that the top stack is actually overowned. It doesn't mean you don't play them. It's still the highest percentage. So we'd see here, for instance, the Yankees. Yankees, second most likely to win, which is 5.6%. The field, you can roster them as a 4 or 5 man stack, 6.7%, which is a difference of minus 16.7%. Does that mean you don't play the Yankees? No, it just means there's still a second most likely. 5.6% of the time, you will win, or the winning lineup will have a 4 or 5 man Yankee stack. But if we take a look at these percentages, okay, for the team stack, understand that these don't add up to 100, right? Because sometimes no 4 or 5 man stack wins. And also, just because they have the highest, like, oh, Boston, yeah, they're by far, they're twice as better than the Yankees or the White Sox. Why don't you play the Red Sox? Well, understand that they'll win 10.7% of the time, which means that 89.3% of the time, some other thing wins. So even though it's the most likely in comparison to all the other teams. So if something else wins, it's like, oh, Slate IQ was wrong. Like, no, like 90% of the time. 9 out of 10 times the Red Sox don't win, right? So people think in terms of, oh, I got to play the Red Sox, I got to play the Yankees, I got to play the White Sox, got to play the Twins or whatever, whoever's up in this winner column. And now I can't play the Cubs, the Pirates, or the Rangers because they're all 0.8% or whatever down here. Less likely. Yeah, but are they more likely than what they'll be owned? Detroit yesterday, 8.8% chance of being the winner as a 4 or 5 man stack. Only going to be owned 0.5% of the time. That's plus EV2. Now, it doesn't happen that often. Do you play 150 lineups and make 150 Detroit Tigers stacks? You can. That is plus EV. Just the likelihood, more likely than not, you're either going to win all the money or lose all of your lineups all at once because it doesn't happen that often. Right. If you have a 500-sided die that you're getting paid 5,000 to 1 on, maybe you don't bet your entire bankroll on that, even though it's extremely plus EV. But this is the section that I look at in Slate IQ because every other part of this is typically the same. The size of the slate will matter. Like if we take a look at stack type leverage, which shows you the construction type. So people ask 4-4, 5-3, 5-2-1, 4-3-1, all of that. Well, based on yesterday's slate, which was 12 games, 24 teams, 5-3 wins about 8% of the time. The field only rosters it at 6%. 5-2-1, about 10% of the time. Field rosters it at 8%. 5-1-1-1, 12% of the time. Field rosters it at 10%. 4-4, 3.8% of the time. Field only rosters it at 3.3%. 4-3-1, 7.74% of the time. Field rosters it at 7.57% of the time. So slightly below. And then 4-2-1-1 and 3-2-2-1, the field rosters it over the amount that it actually wins at. So if you compare all these 5-man stacks, 5-5-5 right here, that's 30% of the time. 8 plus 10 plus 12. 30% of the time, a 5-man stack wins on a 12-game slate. The field will roster it at 24%. Okay? That's a pretty decent gap. Right? It's not just 6%. How much in actual? 24 divided by, that's 25% more likely to win, going from 24 to 30. All these other ones are negative. Now, like before with the Boston example, 30% of the time, a 5-man stack will win a 12-game slate. That means 70% of the time it doesn't, right? So when that happens, it's, do I have to play 5-man stacks anymore? No, it'll win 30% of the time, but only rostered 24% of the field. Positive, expected value. The times that a 4-man, 3-man, 2-man wins, 1-1-1-1-1-1-1, whatever, it's over rostered. Yes, it'll win. That type, anything that's not a 5-man stack on DraftKings will win 70% of the time. But all of those combinations, all of those construction types will be negative EV because they're over-owned. Now, if we take a look, if this was a 5-game slate, these numbers would go down. You would start seeing that 5-man stacks actually tend to be a little over-owned on 5-game slates. The reason for that is people tend to construct 5-man stacks more often than not, but people think the opposite way, right? They think on a 5-game slate, if I just get, there's only 10 teams to choose from. If I get the one team that does well out of these 10 teams, I'm good. But that's the wrong way of thinking. The right way of thinking is there's less of a chance that one of these 10 teams puts up enough runs that pays off a 5-man stack. On a 12-game slate with 24 teams, I don't know what team it's going to be. But if there's a team that puts up 12 runs, someone has the 5-man, and they're the winner in a large field GPP, no matter if it's the lowest owned team. Most likely, if one team puts up a ton of runs, 8 at least, to pay off a 5-man stack, they will be the winner. So you have to think on a 12-game slate, what's the chances of team 1 putting up 10 runs? Let's say 10 runs, X percent. Let's just say it's 2%. Okay, how about the next team? 2%. How about the next team? Now, the teams that have like a 4.5, 5 implied run total, maybe they have a 6% chance of putting up 10 runs. Now we start adding up those percentages, right? We have a 2%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5% for 24 teams. It comes to the chance of one of those 24 putting up at least 10 runs is almost a coin flip at that point. It's almost a coin flip that one of these teams will put up enough runs that a 5-man stack pays off. Now, let's say we did it for the 5-game slate. Now, you only have 10 teams. 2%, 2%, 3%. That doesn't add up to almost a coin flip. But it said 80% of the time, none of the teams put up enough runs, put up at least 8 runs or whatever to pay off a 5-man stack, which means on smaller slates, since it's less likely that one of the teams, no matter what the totals, we don't even look at the totals of the games. Because that's what someone asked yesterday. It's like, all these totals are low. Does it mean I don't stack 5-man? Because we don't expect usually that you're trying to predict an outcome. We don't expect any of these teams. The highest team total is 5.1, and most of these totals are in the 3s. Okay, but what's the probability that a team that has a 3.8 implied run total puts up 8 runs? There's a probability on that. And when there's 24 of those, someone is going to do it. More than a coin flip. And if you don't have a 5-man stack of whatever that team is, who knows what it's going to be on that day? You lose a large field GPP. On a smaller slate, you're not trying to like, oh, well, one game goes off. It's like the likelihood of one of these, it's quite possible the highest scoring team only puts up 5 runs. Even if if all 5 games, they all have they all have 9.5 totals, 10 totals, still doesn't matter. Like the likelihood of one of the teams putting up enough to pay off a 5-man stack is less because there's less teams on the slate. So these stacking numbers, the stack type leverage, will only change based on like slate size. Most of this stuff will just change on slate size. The only thing that won't change is obviously the team stacking because that's all related to the specific slate. So you don't necessarily have to look at the slate texture, dynamics, all this other simulation stuff because it's typically, it's going to be the same. The slate size is going to change those types of things. But it's going to be, if you look at a 5-game slate, the stack type leverage is going to look the same for any 5-game slate. It's going to look the same for any 12-game slate, right? So you don't necessarily even have to look at any of this. So if you go back to all the slate IQs we've been doing for the past 3 years, like that, for a 12-game slate, this is what it's going to look like. I mean, like, it's not going to dramatically look any different than this. So you don't necessarily, on tonight's 12-game slate, it's so different. No. So typically, I'm just looking at the teams right here. So James, is that an accurate assessment of, like, you have a community when people ask, oh, it's this, the 2 variables you're looking at when it comes to like how you should construct your lineup from a stacking perspective. It's the slate size and the field size.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would almost say it's only slate size. I think that on field size, like you can say for the 100-man contests on FanDuel, I know there are people that will go in with their cash lineup, which you care a lot less about stacking and correlation, stuff like that in cash. But I would still even say that on one of these bigger slates, like you can take the teams that have the highest chance of doing very well. And over at my site, I run simulations of all of the teams, and I monitor how often they score 8 or more runs, just like you were saying. I have an 8+ runs percentage. Yesterday, for example, the Diamondbacks had a 6.9% very nice chance of scoring 8 or more runs, but they were only going to be owned like 15% or something like that. And that's really, really nice leverage to have something like that. But on the entire slate, Orioles 5%, Twins 4%, Indians 4.3%, blah, 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 blah. As you look at that and you compare it against the ownerships, I think that you can look at those and you can say, okay, well, the Mets or the Orioles or whoever it is, even in smaller contests, you can decide that you want to prioritize the money makers from that team, I think. And you can put those together in a 3 or 4 or 5-man stack. But based on slate size, I think that's more important. The other thing that I would say is based on pitcher price, because that's where we start to see a lot of stack size kind of degrade, is when we have these pitchers where, I think it was a couple days ago where it was Trevor Bauer and Snell on the mound, right? And then there was just like nothing after them. So people were going out of their way and optimizers were going out of their way to get those 2 pitchers into a stack or into a lineup. But to do that, obviously, you have to give up somewhere. So there were guys like Kirilloff for the Twins and Alex Blandino for the Reds. And there was another cheap guy that was playing Coors or something like that and stuff like that. When you have those one-offs, the one-offs are typically used as value to fit the larger stacks in. But when you have these 2 really expensive pitchers that you're giving up like 8, 9, 10 points in projection, just skipping one of them, right? Like that there's Bauer projected for 30, Snell projected for 28, and then the next dude projected for like 18. Optimizers are going to fight to get those guys in there. And I always say to think like an optimizer. And so you would do the same thing when you were looking at this kind of stuff. And you're obviously going to be saying, okay, well, I can't fit a full Philadelphia stack in there, a full Philadelphia core stack with both of these high-priced pitchers. So you're probably going to end up with like a 3 or a 4 man of Philadelphia plus a lot of other value dudes that are just going to be in there because that's what's going to project best for the slate. That's what's going to give you the best chance of actually ending up doing well on the slate. So I would say there's three things. I think that slate size is probably the largest factor when you're looking at how big your stack should be. And then something like pitcher price, because pitchers are something that are significantly less variable than hitters. And so that's where your projection source, I think, should be focused. And then after that, you can look at a slate or contest size as well. If you want to be more risk averse, then you can consider more like higher stack types. If you if you're more risk averse, you can consider getting more of those value pieces in there and seeding the stacks. But if you are okay accepting the risk and aiming for those endpoints rather than aiming for somewhere towards the top or somewhere towards the middle, I think you can still accept larger stacks based on the contest size that you're in.
But regardless of which way you go, it's not about what's most likely to win. It's about what's more likely to win than what the field is doing. That second part is what throws people, is that it's not, if we showed on today, we don't have slate IQ for today's slate or whatever. But if we go back to, sometimes we have slates where the top stack has like an 18% chance of winning. And it's a large enough slate where it's like 18% is a lot for, let's say the Boston on this slate was 18%.
Yeah, that's huge.
Right, that would be humongous. And people go, well, I guess you have to stack the Red Sox. Well, what happens if I told you that half the lineups are going to have the Red Sox? They're not profitable at that point, because just like relative value, all the points that you get from the Red Sox stack, well, half the lineups in the contest already. You're not going to get anything for that. Does that mean you fade Boston completely? Not necessarily. It just means that you ain't going to win that way. Even though it's the most probable outcome, it is over-owned for their probability. That's why looking at the bottom, when people see my nutso vomit stack sometimes, and I'm playing teams that have 1% chances of being the top stack, like I don't mind. Like here, like I would take a look at this chart right here yesterday. I didn't play GPPs yesterday. But based on this, now understand that Slate IQ is based on the plate IQ projections, not on the bat projections that I do use. So I have to adjust my winning percentage to some extent, because I can't resimulate everything. But I knew yesterday the bat projections were much lower on the White Sox than the plate IQ projections. I also know they were much higher on the Blue Jays than the plate IQ projections.
Same. I had Blue Jays is a very good play. Anyway, continue.
Right, but based on the slate, the win percentage is based on the plate IQ projections, so it only shows 2.3%, and the field has them at 2.4%. Now, obviously, the ownership is not going to change. We're using the RG ownership, so I have to think in terms of, well, Toronto's not really 2.3; it's more like 4.5, and they're going to be under-owned. But if I just use the plate IQ projections, I'd look at this chart and go, when people ask, like, how do you figure out who to play? It's like, I could look right at this chart and I go, I want to play some Cincinnati, 1.7% chance of winning, 0.8% field ownership given to me. Baltimore, 1.5% chance of winning, 0.8% ownership. Now they're lower chances of winning, right? But they're almost double. They win almost twice as much as what the field will own them at, based on our projections. Now, you go down to the bottom, Texas. Like, do you have to go all the way that low to have a 0.8% chance? I mean, like the difference, it seems weird. It seems like there's not much difference between Baltimore and Texas, right? To some extent, right? But it's Baltimore will win twice as often. Even though 1.5% and 0.8% are like, oh, that's not that far away. It's like, no, it's double. It's double. I mean, yes, and yes, the Texas stack will be less owned than what their winning chances is, but not by a dramatic amount, 38%. If I wanted to mix in some Texas, sure, I could have, if playing 100 lineups or whatever. But as you get lower down, like the difference between Toronto, even like, let's say Cleveland. Like Cleveland is 2.2% to win, 2.5% of the field. So that's actually negative So negative 9.9%. They still may be a better stack to use than Texas. Texas is 3 times less likely to win. Cleveland is not that overowned. So it's like you have to judge in comparison that maybe I want to use some Cleveland. Would they be my primary? Maybe not. But I would take a look at this and go, Minnesota? Maybe I don't want any Minnesota. 3.2% chance to win. Field is going to roster them at 4%. 20 on minus 20% difference. The White Sox, minus 24% difference. Especially since the bat had the White Sox even lower. Like, I would have just faded the White Sox. I probably wouldn't have had any of the White Sox. And but if they go up, they still have a 5.1% chance of being the top stack. I mean, like, if, oh my God, there was negative leverage and they still won. A White Sox stack, what? So that you have the percentages here. The point is to make money. The point is not to predict outcomes. So no matter what simulation methodology you use, whatever projections you use, the goal of DFS in the long run, playing it out, slate after slate after slate after slate, is to get your money in good. And getting your money in good, which is plus EV, positive expected value, is to put yourself in a position where the probability of your lineup winning is more than the amount of money that you're risking. So the more than the field is going to own them at. Because that is your ultimate goal in DFS for any DFS contest. I have X% chance of winning with this lineup, and based on what all of my opponents are doing, my lineup has a X% higher chance of winning than their lineups, because it's more likely to happen than their lineups, and you get paid for that. So if this slate in this example, Boston was in half the lineups of the contest on a 12-game slate, I would have no problem if they were if literally a 5-man Boston stack was half owned in a large field, 15,000 lineups. I would have absolutely no problem going to lineup HQ, looking for those X buttons, and just acting like the Red Sox didn't exist at all. Oh, yeah. But they have a 10 points. They have the highest chance of being. I don't care. At that ownership, I don't know how that ever will be profitable. Yeah, I guess you could use a one-off here and there. I guess, but if I played this slate out 10,000 times, I'd make so much more money not having the Red Sox than having the Red Sox. So that's the thing that you have to be thinking about when you build your lineups. Not what's most likely to win, and not what's most likely to win today. It's what's most likely to win if we play. If I were to play MLB DFS every day for 5 years, what should I be doing? On large slates? On any slate? Hell. If you were to, on DraftKings, said for the rest of the rest of the history of DFS, I'm going to be playing DFS for 20 years till I die or whatever. 50 years. If you never did anything, and you played large field GPPs, if you never did anything other than stack 5-man, you just did, I'm just going to do 5X. Just 5, and whatever's left, just whatever the highest projected at that point, give it to me. You wouldn't be doing anything. Like, if you just stuck to that and not had to think about anything else, more likely than not, no matter what the slate size is, whatever, you'd be much better off than spending an hour trying to figure out, well, this is a 4-3-1 slate. Is this a 5-2-1 slate? Is this a 4-4? Is this shit? Well, the totals, like, dude, put on 5-man stacks and run some lineups. Like, people overthink MLB DFS too much. Maybe someone asked me yesterday. It's like, when you make 5-man stacks, how do you figure out your secondary stuff? Like, what fits in the rest of your lineup? I told him, you're not going to like the answer. You know what the answer is, James?
Play whoever you want.
There you go. It's whatever fits. How do you choose? Do I have enough leverage with that stack? Yes. Well, give me the 2 best projected pitchers and the 3 best projected one-offs. Done. I'm playing 10 of those stacks? Oh, well then Give me 2 unique players at least, and give me the next best one. And then give me the next best one. And then give me the next, like, what team is it going to, sometimes it ends up being a 3-man stack. Sometimes it ends up being 2 from the same team. Sometimes it ends up being with a cheap pitcher. Sometimes it's not a cheap pitch. I don't care at this point. I already made the decision. Just fill out the rest of the lineup. Now, if I'm playing a more owned stack or a more owned pitcher, then obviously maybe it's a 3-man stack of another team that is only 2% owned. Okay. But I already have that calculation done in my lineups. Like, it's going to do it for me. Like that, it's all this stuff is going to be done for me. All this work is done. It's amazing. All this stuff is already done for you. I could set even if with a blunt tool in lineup HQ, use ownership sum and go, I want to play a bunch of these stacks and I don't want my ownership to be over X. Because I know that if once I'm past X, I don't have enough leverage. And then you know what it does? It just fills in everything for me. And then I just copy and paste that to a CSV and upload it after making some tweaks. Because obviously you get optimizer damage when it comes to if you're doing especially one-offs. Because like Alex Kirilloff yesterday, right? He was 2K for the Twins.
You're going to get a lot of him.
Right, you're just going to just naturally get as a one-off. Now, if you set your stacks to 4-4 or 5-3,
you won't get as much.
You won't get as much because the Twin stacks, I mean, weren't all that great yesterday. Didn't project all that great, but the only reason they project somewhat well is because you have a 2K hitter in the middle of them. Mm-hmm. So point per dollar value goes up. But if you leave one-offs, if you're like, I'm going to build a lot of 5-1-1-1 lineups, I'm going to buy 5-4-3-1 lineups, you're going to run 150 lineups and see that Kirilloff is in 110 of them. Now, you could want that or something. I mean, you could if you want, but I'm not a big fan of having 70% of a specific hitter. Now, obviously, the only way you can make those lineups is by having a 2K hitter in it. It's not like a 2K hitter that projects well enough. Like he was like projected at like 6.5 points, which for a 2K guy is a lot. But there aren't other 2K guys that project that well. So if Kirilloff was coming into 80% of my lineups, and I said, I want to cap you at 20%, it's not like the projections will find the other 60% and just replace it with another 2K hitter. No other 2K hitter projects for 6.5 points. So now it's not going to make as many of those lineups. Alex Kirilloff one-offs aren't going to turn into some other guy's one-offs. It's going to just turn into a different construction altogether. So that's the type of stuff that I'm doing with the optimizer and the projections to get a good distribution of lineups that I have. But outside of that, like if Kirilloff fits in those lineups, they fit in those lineups. It's just that I know that he's going to be overowned because people are going to oh yes, I got to play the 2K guy that projects for 6.5 points. He's a batter. He'll bat 4 times. Didn't even score any points. I think he got 0 yesterday.
He's been getting 0.
Right,
that's what Alex
been getting 0. Right.
Yeah.
But James, that's the type of thing. That's the type of thing that you do. But you have to think common sense. Like to me, it's like if there's a 2K guy that projects for 6.5 points, and I'm going to play 150 lineups, like you have to know that you're going to get a lot of them. And that may not be the best move to play him at all. If he's going to be 22% owned on a 12-game slate, and people that don't know you use optimizers will end up having 80% of them without even realizing it. So now I don't want to build those constructions. I think those constructions will be overowned. Maybe X out Kirilloff altogether. And now the lineups look different. So I just let the tool. I make the choices of what I want to do, what teams I want to play. And typically for the rest of the lineup, I'm allowing the projections to just put in the best stuff. Either give me the highest projection or give me the most leverage. One of the two. Give me one of the two. And then you check your lineups and then you see, am I getting enough leverage? What I do, I go to my lineup section, I sort by projected ownership, and I go, is this lineup 2 owned? If I go no, great. If I go yes, that means I need to find lower owned stuff to do. And then I also look at the projections and I go, the worst projected lineup, does it project well enough? Most of the time, yes, because it's baseball and 14 points is one swing of the bat. So I could have lineups that project 40 points below optimal and still be fine. I'm not typically not getting ones that are that low. But I take a look at those and I go, okay. And when I'm satisfied with the diversification, I upload it. Whoever ends up in the lineup ends up in the lineup. I mean, it sounds like I'm just throwing crap against the wall, but like mathematically, my lineups, I've condensed them to a point in this range of like this EV range. I'm like, okay, here's 100 of them. There you go. Do your job. Hopefully one of these gets there. And if none of them get there this day, I'll just do it again tomorrow.
Well, and one thing that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned is if the Red Sox are going to be in half of the lineups, but they have
using that as an example.
Yeah, using that as an example.
Like egregiously overowned, right?
Sure. If the Red Sox on a 12-game slate are going to have an average of 50% ownership, right? Like JD Martinez 50% owned and Devers is 50% owned and blah blah blah. Like if they have an 18% chance in my models of scoring 8+ runs, but they have an aggregate ownership of like 160 or 170% or something like that. Something just egregious. And we've seen it before. Like we saw it with the Phillies. The Phillies literally had an aggregate ownership on a shorter slate of like 180% or something, which is hilarious. But it's because they were underpriced. I get it. Say that you have that, and then you also have DeGrom pitching on the slate, right? And DeGrom, he was 83% or something owned, which he should be. Right, like he definitely should be.
It was like 10,900. It was like 10,900, and it's like this guy's 3,000 underpriced.
It was so dumb, dude. It was so dumb, and you could fit him as well. It wasn't even that like they didn't even price up the bats. They're just like, yeah, sure, yeah, have DeGrom and the Phillies and Coors, whatever, do your thing. But if you have both of those things, and you have the Phillies who have an average ownership of 40% owned, and you have DeGrom, who is literally 85% owned, why on earth would you play both of them together? And the answer is that people say that it's the thing that gives you the best chance of winning. And it's like, but
no. It gives you the best. That gives you the best chance of scoring the most points.
Sure.
Not necessarily win, right? Because remember, people, we talk about this in the course. It's not about scoring the most points.
Right.
It's about beating the most people. Right.
About beating other people. So it gives you the chance of scoring the most points. And it's like, yeah, dude, but everyone has that combo. 40% of the field. So here you are, where you have 40% owned Rhys Hoskins, who hits 2 home runs, and you have 85% owned Jacob deGrom, who puts up 50 million points, and you didn't even cash. And the reason for that is because you took both of these things that have all of the ownership, and now you're competing with 40% of the field that has these combinations, and you have to be more perfect than the rest of the field with your other spots in order to actually do well on the slate. Not even win. We're not even talking about winning the slate at this point.
We're talking about cashing.
Yeah, we're just talking about being in the top 20%. You have to be perfect now to even 1.5x your money, because we don't even double our money anymore when we place in the top 20%. We just 1.5x% it. So when you have these things, like I always talk about leverage points in my community. Anybody who ever looks at like what I am doing on a slate, I talk about leverage points. And sometimes there's like 5 leverage points. Sometimes you have 5 decisions to make. You have DeGrom, you have the Phillies, you have the Giants, you have another cheap pitcher or something like that. Like you have 4 to 6 leverage points, but sometimes you only have 2. Sometimes you only have DeGrom and the Phillies. And if you have those 2 leverage points, you have to take the other side of one of those points. You can't take both of those things, even if they project very, very well, even if they give you the best projection and you can do it. Just because you can have that combination does not mean that you should have that combination, because you have no leverage. You have no way of gaining relative value on the field. oh, well, you can play one-offs. Oh, just play the best plays. Like, dude, yeah, you can have one-offs, but now you're putting together like all of this variance and hoping that your one-offs are more perfect than the rest of the field, when instead of taking the Phillies, you could just fade the Phillies and take, I don't know, man, the Blue Jays, who have a 1% less chance of scoring 8+ runs at like half the ownership of the Phillies. And there you go. Like you have already given yourself the relative value over like 30% of the field who are taking the Phillies, and you can still have DeGrom, and your projection is only like 4 points less or something than a Phillies stack. And that is something that I really want to highlight as we're talking about this idea of percentile chances being better than what the field thinks. Sure, if the Phillies have an 18% chance of winning the slate and as a 5-man stack, and they are owned like 19% by the field on average, that's negative, but only a little bit. And it's like, okay, you can still consider that. But then you have the Blue Jays who have like a 12% chance of winning the field, and the field is only rostering them at 6%. Like, dude, slam the Phillies into your lineups.
Slam the Blue Jays.
Blue Jays. Slam the Blue Jays into your lineups, because you have twice as much of a chance of beating the field. Like, the field is not considering that. So these are really, really important things to think through when you are making your lineups. Like, build out your 5 stacks and find where the field is underestimating how well a team is going to do, because especially this year, and this is something that I've wanted to talk about like more in depth, we are seeing such heavy concentration this year. Like, wouldn't you agree, Jordan, that we're seeing heavier concentration this year in MLB than we have seen in years past?
Heavy concentration in what?
In like chalk, in teams that people think are going to do well.
But I mean, no, it's normal.
I think we're seeing more because we're seeing more people with access to optimizers and more people with access to good projections and stuff like that. I
guess
think
so, but I mean, I've seen that. I've seen that last year. I mean, that's what I exploit.
Well, no, I agree. I just, okay, so you don't think that there's more. I have felt that there has been more concentration on chalk, and therefore more leverage in these teams that are the 3rd or the 4th best stack. And I think that with NFL, that's something that you absolutely exploit as well, is when you look at it and you say, okay, well, this team has a 52 over under, but they're going to be like 35% owned as a stack. And then you have the next team, like the 3rd highest over under is like 48 or something, and they only have like 10% ownership. And that's something that I love to exploit as well. I take that same thought into MLB, where these teams that have an 8 or a 9% chance to score 8 or more runs are going to be owned with an aggregate of 120%. And then you have a team that has a 6% chance of scoring 8 or more runs, and they only have an aggregate of 20%. Like, give me all of that team that's only going to be owned 20% owned. I'll have a little bit of the team that has the highest chance to score 8 or more runs, just because, like, if I'm building 15, 20 lineups, I don't want to die in all of them. Like,
no, but I mean, you're doing it for depending on the leverage in the lineup, because we have a question here from Kai Roach. If I just cross out the negative leverage stacks, will all my lineups be plus EV, or will I still have to worry about pitching? If you cross out all the negative leverage stacks, said you're increasing the variance of your play very much so.
You will
in that example
or lose everything.
Right. Remember, lineups, not players. Well, if I cross out all the negative, okay, let's say we cross out all the negative leverage stacks. The stacks aren't the only parts of my lineup. I still have 3 more spots. I still have 2 pitchers. So the point is, you want to increase your probability and lower your ownership. Well, if I've already lowered my ownership, I need to increase my probability, which means in that example, let's say with the Boston example, the team that's way too, let's say, the stack is going to be owned 50% of lineups, like that example. Does that mean you don't play any Red Sox? Well, if I'm going to play a stack that's only going to be 1% owned, maybe I do have JD Martinez as a one-off in that line. Maybe I have a 3-man. It is the highest projected, highest probability. So it doesn't mean I have to completely get rid of them. They're still the highest. It's not like, oh, they're over-owned and they're low probability. No, they're the highest probability players on the entire slate. So as long as I have leverage, proper amount of leverage, I can still use them. So that's why, like, if I'm building 100 lineups today on DraftKings, and if that example happens, I may X them out as a 5-man stack. I'll still leave them in my player pool. They'll probably show up. And if I play on this slate, if I played that Rangers all the way at the bottom that no one was going to play, and I'm playing a 5-man Rangers. And remember, the Texas Rangers, each guy may only be owned 1.5%, right? Each guy. So now I'm playing 5 of those guys that are going to be 1 to 2% owned. Well, if Rafael Devers is the highest rejected third baseman and he's going to be 45% owned, who cares? I already have leverage all I need. So give me the highest probability third baseman if I need a third baseman. What pitchers am I playing? Give me the 2 chalk pitchers. I don't care about their ownership anymore. Give me the highest probability pitchers. I have all the leverage I could possibly need by a Rangers stack. So it doesn't mean I X things out. I may X them out as a 5-man stack if they're way over-owned. But even in this example, the White Sox, doesn't mean you don't play any 5-man stacks. It just means that if you do play a 5-man stack, the rest of the lineup, that would be a lineup that has a contrarian pitcher in it. Because it's still a high probability. In comparison to all the teams on this slate, they're 4th. So does it mean I don't play the White Sox? No. All this chart tells you is that if you do play the 5-man White Sox, try to get maybe get different elsewhere to make up for the negative leverage of the stack, to then make your full lineup plus EV, right? If you eliminate these things, if I eliminated the Yankees yesterday, and I took a look at all these negatives, eliminated the Twins, eliminated the White Sox, eliminated whoever's negative, and then build my lineups, would those lineups be plus EV? Yes. They'd also win much less often. So yes, it's the difference of, do you want to roll a 500-sided die or a 250-sided die, right? So one has higher EV, yeah, sure. But I mean, if you're going to put the same amount of money, and like, if you were to X out all of, like, if you were just saying, I'm not owning, let's say in a baseball slate, you say, I'm never going to own anyone over 10% owned, right? No matter what size slate, no matter what size nothing. Would you have plus EV lineups? You could make plenty of plus EV lineups. The problem is that you're going to lose like 99% of the time. Do you have the bankroll to sustain that? If you do, if you're playing a very small percentage of your bankroll, very, very small, you could probably do that. You could say, screw it. I'm going to lose. I'm going to play 180 slates this year. I'm going to lose 176 of them. And on 4 of these slates, 1 or maybe 2 of this time, I hit that 500-sided die roll. And you make all the money in one slate. And you have $50,000 at once. That's typically the way I used to play. That's why I only played small percentages of my bankroll. I'm playing all these vomit stacks. I'm playing, I'm Xing out expensive teams. I'm doing all that type of stuff. The swings in that, you can lose every slate for 2 months doing that. Even though you're plus EV. It's like rolling a 500-sided die and trying to guess the number. Yeah, you're getting paid 5,000 to 1, but you're going to be wrong 499 out of 500 times. Do you want to do that? Would you rather roll a 100-sided die getting 250 to 1? Be like, okay, that's still profitable. Well, then maybe you do mix in. Maybe you do play some of the chalk Boston, but you don't play the whole chalk lineup. That's going to be negative EV. Maybe you do mix in. Maybe you have 1 Texas lineup, but you don't have 50 Texas lineups, right? It's actually less EV, but more likely for you to realize your EV. If you were to just play, like, I'm just going to play like the lowest, I'm going to play Texas and Detroit, and that's all you're going to play. You're just like, I'm going to build 20 lineups, and they're all going to be like sub 1% owned type lineups. Like, you could go the whole goddamn season and not win. You could go 3 seasons and not. I mean, like that's how much variance there is. Where you do that every day. I was just going to stack all 5. I'm going to play 20 lineups. 4 lineups of 5 different stacks, and they're all going to be 1% owned stacks. Oh, well, now I have a that much better shot than doing all 20 of one. Yeah, sure. And you could still lose 176 out of 180 slates. So you can do that. But if you're only going to play, I'm playing 10% of my bankroll, you're going to be broke. Like the likelihood of you being broke doing that is extremely high. You're going to play 0.5% of your bankroll doing that. If we zoomed out on this graph of this time horizon to like 10 years, you're gonna have as much money as anyone else, right? You're gonna win because you're gonna win 50K like once a year, once every 2 years, and over 10-year sample size. So yeah, you have plenty, as much money as someone that's still playing some chalky stuff and some whatever. So it's just a matter of variance. It's not a matter of which one do you do. But the likelihood of the risk of ruin of playing like a 0.6% owned stack that has a 1% chance of winning, while it's still plus EV, it's not going to happen that often. So don't necessarily. So if you're just wiping out, what are the top 5 highest owned stacks? Let me just exclude them from my player pool. You can do that. You're not going to win that often. When you win, it's going to be a lot of money, but I mean, it may only happen once a season. So, and most people don't have the cojones to do that consistently, right? Because they'll lose like 35 slates in a row and go, I think I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's not even considering hedging either, right? I mean, you and I talk about the way that you MME, like you have these lineups where you have a pitcher against a stack, and then later on you'll build a stack against that pitcher. And so if you are looking for a lot of variance and you're looking for a lot of leverage, maybe you take the pitcher against the Red Sox. That's massive leverage. And
yeah, but it's not as much. See the taking pitchers against the stack only because there's so many different stack combinations. In our specific example, you're never going to see a 12-game slate where one team is 50% owned. I mean, we're using this, but in that egregious example, yes, I would. There would be enough leverage there that I would just take the pitcher against the Red Sox. Yes,
right. But when you're looking at like those kinds of things and you're thinking about hedging your lineups and you're thinking about building out a whole bunch of lineups, if you're a 1-player guy or like a 3-player guy or 1 lineup guy or a 3 lineup guy, you're probably not thinking too much about hedging. You're probably just building the best lineups that you can, and you're not going to worry that much about hedging. But if you have 150 lineups, or like even me, if I have 15 lineups, 20 lineups, because I just started a new challenge where I'm trying to build up $500 into $5,000 by the end of the season. Today, my bankroll is $14. So I'll have like 10 lineups, maybe 14 lineups if I go into the mini max, something like that. I'll probably end up hedging on 2 or 3 of those lineups against the pitchers because I don't want to have everything riding on those pitchers doing well. If those pitchers suck, then I want to try to take advantage of those pitchers sucking. So
that's a matter of diversification, not a matter of strategy.
Yeah, it's diversification, but it is saying that if that pitcher is up against a stack that is maybe going to be really popular, maybe I have a pitcher up against the White Sox because the White Sox strike out a lot or something like that. Later on, like after I've built out a bunch of lineups, then I'm probably going to want a White Sox stack so that if that pitcher ends up getting destroyed, because the White Sox have plenty of power too, I want to take advantage of that as well. And if the White Sox are going to be higher owned, if I were just saying that I'm not going to play this stack because it is going to be high owned, I have taken myself away from the ability to hedge. I have taken myself away from the ability to cover that base on 1% of my lineups. So that's another part of it.
That's not required. You don't have to do that.
No, but it's something that I do. I'm just giving the example of like, if you cross out those players and those lineups and those teams, you don't have the ability to do that thing that I like to be able to do. You don't have the ability to have the flexibility of having those teams in your portfolio and your diversification. The only thing that I do that I'm adamant about is just fading cores. And that's because I know that ownership on cores is always going to be super high and I can find other things, but I also am a masochist. And even when I go to cores games, because I live here in Denver, that's always just the worst. Somebody hits a home run and I'm sitting in the stands like, yeah, that sucks. But it's a good time. So that,
but the main reason is because they typically tend to be over-owned.
right, exactly. And
Tend to be. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes we have slates where there's a Wrigley win game and the Coors game is too expensive, and then it ends up being the other way.
I was just going to say,
once in a while, and typically that's when I'm playing Coors.
If the sites actually price Coors appropriately, then they're not, over-owned. But when Raimel Tapia is freaking 3K leading off, then I'm not playing Coors, man. I'm just not doing that because he's going to be like 40% owned. And like, why would I do that? But
he could be played in certain lineups. Like, we have to make this. It always comes down to lineups, not players. Where, like, someone's asking in the chat about playing a chalky one-off be negative EV. Like, in a vacuum, yes, all of these things in a vacuum are true, but they could be made up for in so many other ways inside of a lineup. If you have if Raimel Tapia at 3K is 40% owned, but he projects at 3K for 10.5 points, and you're building a lineup that already has enough leverage to win the contest that you're in, and you need to find an outfielder to plug into your lineup, you could play Raimel Tapia in that line. I mean, is he the highest projected guy? Yes. In a vacuum, he's negative EV just by himself, but you're not playing players. You're playing lineups. Now, you could only play him as a plus in a plus EV lineup because he's going to suck out a lot of the EV of the lineup because he's a 40% owned one-off. But if he's the highest projected guy, the highest probability guy, and even by putting him in your lineup, the lineup is still plus EV, why not? If you put him in the lineup and it's like, okay, now your lineup is too owned, not leveraged enough, yeah, then he's not going to be in many of those lineups because his 40% ownership is going to ruin that. But he still can fit into lineups. So you'll see. I'll play 150 lineups. And Raimel Tapia in that instance, I could not have no core stacks, nothing. I take the stacks out, but I still have the one-offs there. Still have them in my player pool. And Tapia shows up in 3 out of 150 lineups. Yeah. And people go, well, why are you playing Raimel Tapia? And he's 40% owned in 3. Well, he fits in 3 of those lineups. I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, you should X him out. No, what does it matter? He fits in those 3 lineups. Those 3 lineups are plus EV. They have the highest rejection for the lowest ownership. Done. For the size of the contest I'm in, done. Easy. End of story. They fit, it fits. Turns out he only fits in 3 of them, right? If I was building a lot more contrarian stacks, I assumed that instead of being in 3 in 150, he would have been in 17 of 150 or something because his ownership wouldn't matter as much because I'm playing a lot of garbage stuff. But if I'm playing, depending on how the ownership of the stacks that I'm playing, you only fit in 3% of my line. As an example, I'm giving it as an example, but this is what you're looking for. This is where people use optimizers wrong, right? They go, oh no, okay, I don't mind having 71% of a 40% owned hitter and just jamming him into all of my line. Yeah, you could. I mean, you could. You're just not gaining that much out of it. And you take a look at your lineups, and it's like, what ends up happening is that you cache a lot of your lineups, and you think you're like, oh, I'm getting this. Oh, I'm playing 100 line. Oh, I'm doing like the pros do, playing 150 lineups. And I'm cashing a whole bunch of them. But you're really not building many lineups that have a chance of winning first place. That's what we're looking to do, right, James? Win first place.
Why would you play GPP otherwise?
That's where all the money is.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 777 contest today, right? The $777 contest. And I understand that's like priced out of a lot of people, but if you look at that contest, it's $100K to first. It is $3,000 to 7th. $3,000. If you don't place first in that contest, you have lost. Because like you made a little bit of money, but like if you think about the bankroll that you need to have to play a 777 contest, and you think about what $3,000 means to that bankroll, that is a drop in the bucket, dude. Like that's not even it. You made like 2% ROI on that day, and you didn't save your season at all. So,
but take a look at FanDuel. FanDuel has the main GPP, $5, right?
Yeah.
price
That's
range,
nice.
right? $5. It's 30,000 to first, 10,000 to second, sixth place is $1,000.
Yeah.
Okay. The difference between sixth place and first place could be 2 points. And it's a 35,000 entry. It's a 35,000 entry contest. The difference between first place and sixth place is 29,000. Is that dramatic?
That's your season, you know? Like,
right.
and
the difference, those 2 points may make the difference of you being profitable or not, if you could even come up. So if you're making lineups where it's like, oh, look, I cashed a bunch of my lineups, it's like you're losing. There's all the money is up there. Play lineups to try to get up there, right?
It's why earlier in this year, remember when we were doing NBA and I was complaining about that Anthony Davis lineup where like Anthony Davis had a floor game and I placed like 13th place or something in a GPP. And if he just had
a median, you would have won.
The median and it's 20K and I'm profitable for the NBA season. Guess what? Was not profitable for the NBA season.
Right. And that's all it takes.
And
right.
that's all that is.
Right.
Yep.
But if you're not aiming up there, you're just going to bleed your money away. That's the point that we're making. It's not about finding the most probable outcomes. It's finding the most profitable outcomes. What's the easiest way for me to win first place? By playing stuff that other people aren't playing, and that hits. You don't have to score 300 points. You just have to score more points than your opponents. And if the chalk misses and you're hit, you win. I mean, most sharp players, when the chalk hits, especially in baseball, it's closed laptop. Trust me, that's that. Oh, chalk 4,000, 40% on Ramel Tapia hit a home run. Closed laptop, right? Oh, over-owns SB2, right? Some on DraftKings, like Danny Duffy's 60% owned as a 7K SB2, and he goes out and throws 7 innings with 9 strikeouts. Close the laptop. Doesn't mean these sharp players don't have these players. It's just they don't have a lot of. Just they don't make a lot of plus EV lineups. So the likelihood of them being together is going to be very low. So you have to think in those terms. Most people don't. They want to know what's going to happen. I don't care what's going to happen. All I care is about what is the field going to do, and what's more likely to happen than what the field is going to. That's it. The field moves. I move. Right. That's all that matters to me. Oh well, yesterday the White Sox were overowned and the Blue Jays were underowned. Well, the White Sox scored more points. Yeah, but I thought the White Sox would score more points. Like if you asked me, the likelihood of the White Sox outscoring the Blue Jays, that was the most probable thing. But the most profitable thing, if we played the slate out 1,000 times, was to bet on the Blue Jays. It's the result. I don't care about the results. Oh, you were wrong on the White Sox. No, I wasn't. I never predicted an outcome. I just said they're overowned. That's it. And the Blue Jays are underowned. Well, the Blue Jays didn't do crap yesterday. Okay, were they supposed to? Right? I don't know. I'm not predicting outcomes. All I know is I look at the field, I look at the projections, and I go, okay, this team is overowned, this team is underowned. Build lineups. Build plus EV lineups now. Go ahead. Go do it. So in your challenge, how are you primarily playing what? Like the $1.20 max or something like that?
Yeah, lately I've been playing the mini max. That's what I've started with. I will.
Oh, so you're doing like a full scale, like 150 or something.
When I have that bankroll, yeah. I don't have that bankroll yet. I started with $500. So
okay, 500. But what a mini? What you could still do? What the mini? What's
well,
the mini max?
I could do the quarter.
I can't see these contests on DraftKings. So how much is the mini max?
The mini max is $1.
Oh, okay. I thought the mini max was a quarter. That's why.
No, that's the quarter arcade. So the mini max is $1. And I played. So the first day it was that split slate, right, where we had 7 games early and 8 games late. So I ended up playing $16 that day. I made $1.50, so that wasn't awesome. But then yesterday I made $12 off $15, so better. I had a lineup that placed like 190th or something. If I'd have had Hayes instead of Mountcastle, I finished like 20th or something. But I didn't. So life's
Right.
hard.
You don't have the guy that hits 2 home runs. Yeah.
Right. So, but I had Oriole stacks. I had a lot of Orioles. I had a lot of Blue Jays. I had a lot of Diamondbacks. I had the right pieces, but like I just didn't have the right, players. So today I have $14 to play with, playing 3% of my bankroll. I'm at $482.50 right now. So
Okay.
It'll go. I expect a lot more of the $1.50 returns than the $12 returns, but the hope is that in the next month or two, I have a $4,000 return, and then that's stepping forward. So
Right. You do the same thing that I do, just that I play
just
higher. That's the only difference.
Yeah, I'm doing it to show, like, if you don't have a huge bankroll, you can still play in a smart way. You can still allocate things correctly, so long as you're looking at things and paying attention to paying attention to the percentages. Don't pay attention. I only use projections to build my stacks because I still hand build. Eventually, when I get past 20 lineups, I'm gonna have to go use lineup HQ. But for now, I'm hand building and I'm just looking at things. I'm saying, okay, these guys project well. I like these lineups, and I'm just going to build these stacks. And then I'm going to hedge for 2 or 3 of the lineups, and hopefully one of them gets there. And yeah.
You're doing that over at paydirtdfs.com.
I am. Yeah, paydirtdfs.com. You can go there.
And it still just redirects.
It's still just redirect. But
now I'm going to just get on your case that you still haven't set up a DNS mask, so it looks like the real domain.
We'll get there, Jordan. But for now,
at least you got it.
It's paydirtdfs.com. You can find all of my tweeting, which is not very good. It's just mostly shit posting at paydirt_DFS. Definitely, I've really enjoyed this baseball season so far. I think that a lot of people have learned a lot of stuff in the community. So come join the community. $30 a month, every single sport under the sun, and yeah, definitely.
And then a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, as we normally talk about, is in the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. How to think like a professional DFS player. 15-hour audio masterclass. Has all these chapters. Game objectives, player selection, expected value, leverage, correlation, construction, risk management, exploit psychology, miscellaneous chapter. 15 hours, bunch of testimonials here. See the table of contents. So if you want to learn this stuff, if you want to have a nice structured education, where it's all in there, you could reference it. There are many people that have listened to this multiple times. You could listen to this once a month. It applies to any sport. It's not just about MLB. It's about any sport. It applies to NFL. It applies to NBA. It applies to NHL. It's not a coincidence that some of the best DFS players, they just happen to be good at all the sports. Is it because they know all the sports? No. It's because they're good at DFS. So what do they do? What are these concepts? So if you want to pick that up, it's at theoryofdfs.com. And we got a nice slate today. We got how many games? A bunch of games. 9-game slate. Okay, decent enough. Not small, not large, but good, nice size on it. And we'll be going over what low owned stuff did I do that didn't come in yesterday, and if hopefully the chalk fail. Like that's what I just pray for the chalk failing every single day, and we'll discuss it tomorrow because I'm here every Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, for the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders.com.